HOA Karen broke my disabled daughter's arm, unaware I'm a federal agent. They say justice is blind, but mine has 20/20 vision and a daughter with a broken arm. My name is Raymond Cross. I'm a federal agent with the U.S. Department of Justice, Counterterrorism Division. You wouldn't know that by looking at me in jeans and a hoodie, sipping coffee while walking my daughter, Layla, through our new neighborhood park. We moved to Crestview Springs for one reason: healing. Layla was born with osteogenesis imperfecta brittle bone disorder. She's 10, smart as a whip, loves butterflies, and walks with a pink forearm crutch we customized together. I work high-stakes cases, fugitives, extremist groups, cartel cleanups, but nothing prepared me for the predator who wore pearls, toted a clipboard, and called herself president of the Crestview HOA. Her name Karen Mallory James, and the day she put her hands on my child is the day her world shattered. Part 1. You never expect it to be your kid. Not when you've dealt with the worst people this country can offer: gang leaders, domestic terrorists, white-collar con men. I've been undercover in cities that chew people up, but nothing ever hit me like seeing my daughter on the ground, crying, her arm bent in a way no child's arm should ever bend. Layla was trying to pick a dandelion. It was a warm Saturday morning. Crestview Springs bloomed in early spring sunlight. Birds chirped over trimmed hedges. Our cul-de-sac, with its white fences and manicured lawns, looked like the kind of place you'd retire in, not where you'd prepare for war. We'd only lived here 3 weeks. I picked this place after a high-profile op went south in Phoenix. I wanted peace for Layla, who had already endured 6 surgeries by age 10. That morning, she wore her purple butterfly dress. Her mobility crutch rested beside the park bench while she crouched down near the edge of a community flower bed, about 2 feet into the grass. I sat on the bench, sipping coffee, off-duty, invisible, just a dad. Then I heard the voice. "Excuse me, that child is trespassing." I turned. She strode across the grass like she owned the soil. Blonde bob, crisp white blouse, tight slacks, and a clipboard clutched like a sword. Karen Mallory James. Her eyes narrowed as she approached Layla, voice sharp enough to slice granite. "There's no playing in the HOA managed flower beds. That's a policy violation." Layla looked up, confused. "She's not playing," I said, rising. "She's picking a weed. We'll go." Karen didn't back off. "She's damaging property. And where's her parent? Right here." I stepped closer. "She's fine. Back off." Karen's eyes shifted, cold and calculating. "Well, your child shouldn't be left to crawl all over our landscaping. Rules are rules." "She's not crawling," I said, trying hard to keep my tone even. "She has a condition. You're out of line." But Karen wasn't listening. She reached out. Everything slowed. She grabbed Layla's arm sharply, abruptly, and yanked her up by it. I heard the scream first, then the crack. Layla's scream tore through the park like a siren. Her little body twisted midair before crumpling onto the grass. Her arm dangled unnaturally, wrist limp, shoulder slumped, and something inside me snapped. I dropped the coffee. "Don't move," I said coldly, stepping between them. Karen's face went pale. She was damaging the plants. "She has OI," I growled. "That's a brittle bone disorder. You just fractured her arm." "She shouldn't have." I pulled out my wallet, flipped open the badge. "Raymond Cross, federal agent. You just assaulted a disabled minor." People were gathering. Phones were filming. Karen stumbled back, clipboard falling. A child nearby gasped. I knelt beside Layla, who was crying but conscious, holding her shoulder. She pulled too hard." "Daddy, I know. Sweetheart, I'm here." I called EMS. I called the local PD, and I called someone else. Not a cop, not an ambulance, a federal liaison. Karen was about to find out who she just laid hands on and what that meant. The hospital visit confirmed what I feared. Compound fracture, upper humerus, a clean break with microfractures across the joint. Layla needed surgery. Again. Rachel, my ex-wife, Flew in that night. We'd split amicably years ago, mutual respect, shared custody, but we both broke down in the waiting room when we saw Layla asleep in a sling, drugged, cheeks still stained with dried tears. Who did this, Rachel asked. An HOA tyrant with too much time and zero compassion? What do we do now? I looked her in the eye. I burned her whole house of lies down, brick by brick. The police came that evening. 2 officers, polite but cautious. Karen had filed a report, claiming I threatened her with violence and that she was trying to protect HOA property from a wild child. I handed them footage. One neighbor's video captured the entire incident, Karen yelling, Layla crying, the moment of the arm pull, everything. The officers nodded grimly. This will help a lot. We're opening an assault case. You're in the right. Assault on a disabled minor, I corrected. Add that. But as they left, the younger officer paused. Just so you know, she's connected, sits on the HOA board, big donor to city council, country club types. She's gotten away with a lot. I smiled. Cold. She hasn't met me yet. The next day, I started my own file. Not as a father, as a federal investigator. I dug into Crestview's HOA records. They were murky. The HOA wasn't fully registered with the state. Their bylaws were outdated, citing rules that no longer legally applied. Karen wasn't elected. She stepped in after the last president moved and never held a proper vote. Worse, they had no ADA compliance language, no accommodations policy, no complaint mechanism for abuse. Rachel helped me go through the social media pages. We found dozens of comments from residents afraid of retaliation, people fined for minor things, corrected in public, or shamed on the HOA Facebook group. And children with disabilities repeatedly harassed for noise violations, mobility hazards, or unauthorized equipment. It wasn't just Karen's ignorance. It was systemic. Then came the call I expected. Karen's lawyer, a smarmy voice. My client regrets the misunderstanding and would like to avoid an extended legal battle. We propose a settlement covering hospital costs and a non-disclosure agreement. I laughed. You think this is about money? She acted out of concern. She broke a disabled child's arm. Litigation will affect your job. Sir, there's no need to go nuclear. I said nothing for a beat. Then this is nuclear. You just don't know it yet. Click. 2 days later, I filed federal charges, civil rights violations under the ADA, child endangerment, assault with injury. Then I called every journalist I'd ever protected from harm. I gave them the truth on the record, as Layla's father, not an agent. The headlines came fast. HOA president accused of breaking disabled child's arm. Father is federal agent. Crestview HOA under fire pattern of abuse uncovered. And when the first wave hit, Karen's carefully curated empire cracked. Neighbors started speaking up. One man shared a story of Karen threatening to evict his sister wheelchair user over property aesthetics. A mother posted a photo of her autistic son crying as Karen berated him for walking too close to a pond. Even members of the actual HOA board came forward. She kept us quiet, one wrote anonymously. Said she'd clean up the neighborhood, but it was always kids, immigrants, or veterans she went after. I didn't stop, because Layla still winced in her sleep, because no child should learn that people can hurt them and get away with it, and because Karen didn't just break a bone. She broke something deeper, but she didn't realize some things heal stronger. Part 2. I've stared into the eyes of people who would kill for money, power, revenge. I've seen what guilt looks like when it's buried under pride. But nothing looked like Karen Mallory James when the world started watching. It began slowly. A few shares, a few comments. Then it caught fire. The video, Layla's scream, the sound of her bone, the still frame of Karen's hand gripping her shoulder. It wasn't just the clip that burned, it was what it represented: a disabled child, assaulted in daylight, in a community that claimed to value families. Within 48 hours, justice for Layla was trending. The Today Show called, Good Morning America. Even ProPublica sent an investigative team. Karen tried to hide. She turned off comments, deleted her social media, sent cease and desist letters to neighbors. But it was too late. You don't control the narrative when you break a child's arm. You become it. I was in D.C. briefing my liaison when I got the call from Rachel. She went on local TV. She just did a live interview on Channel 8. Claimed you were unstable and that Layla attacked her. She called it self-defense. My blood ran cold. The clip surfaced online an hour later. Karen, in a blazer and pearls, saying, "It's tragic what happened, but I was acting out of duty. That child was aggressive, and I feared for my safety." A neighbor responded with a stitched TikTok showing the full video. Here's what fear looks like. The caption read, "It's a lie." That post got 2.6 million views overnight. Karen's credibility gone. But what concerned me more wasn't the deflection. It was what she did next. She sued us, filed an emergency defamation suit in county court, claiming reputational harm, loss of income, emotional distress. Rachel texted me a photo of the paperwork with a single caption. She just made it federal. I called my DOJ supervisor, explained everything, the videos, the civil rights angle, the intimidation. He listened in silence, then said, "You have full clearance. Run it." That's how I got access to the Crestview HOA's internal records through a formal FOIA request filed under the Fair Housing Act. As a federal agent, I was within rights to investigate civil code violations in a case of community-based discrimination, and what I found was explosive. Karen wasn't just a rogue HOA president. She was the tip of a spear, part of a network of heritage preservationists who used HOA status to enforce unofficial, discriminatory policies across several Virginia communities. I found old memos marked internal only. No exterior medical devices visible from the street. Encourage families with special needs to relocate. Reject modification requests that disturb aesthetic continuity, particularly ramps, therapy gardens, or sound fences. And the worst, a shared spreadsheet titled Monitoring High-Risk Families. Layla's name was on it. My hands shook when I saw it. This wasn't just harassment. It was profiling, organized, intentional, and Karen was running point. I wasn't alone anymore. May Chen, a local journalist, contacted me after seeing the hashtag trend. She said people have whispered about Karen for years. They just needed a match. We met at a diner, booth by the window. I gave her documents, audio from HOA board meetings, testimonials. She took it all without blinking. "Are you worried about retaliation?" she asked. "No." I said, "She should be." A week later, the headline dropped, "Disabled girl assaulted by HOA leader. Feds uncover civil rights violations in suburban network." By noon, DOJ officials had confirmed an open investigation. By 2 p.m., I was back in Crestview, and that's when I saw the first sign. Literally, painted on Karen's garage, "Monster in Pearls." She'd called the police, but this time, they didn't sympathize. The officer who took her statement was the same one who'd watched the video of Layla. He listened, nodded, took notes. Then, as he walked away, he said, "Actions have consequences, ma'am." Karen doubled down. She hired a crisis PR firm, put out a statement accusing me of weaponizing federal resources for personal revenge, claimed the real victims were good neighbors afraid to speak. But by then, no one bought it. Former HOA board members began speaking out. "I resigned last year." One wrote, "She threatened to fine my daughter for having epilepsy, said the fits were disruptive." Others leaked documents showing Karen personally denied dozens of modification requests, from wheelchair ramps to sensory gardens to support animal approvals. And then came the final blow. A whistleblower. Derek Tran, former HOA treasurer. He posted a 20-minute video online. Calm, measured, devastating. "She told us it was about order," Derek said, "but it was about control, about pushing out families who didn't fit. When she hurt that little girl, I couldn't stay silent anymore." He ended the video with a photo of Layla. "She deserves better. We all do." That night, the HOA Hall of Shame. TikTok team showed up at our neighborhood. They weren't kids anymore. They were journalists with phone cameras, drones, and data, and they had a mission. By the time their video series went live, Karen's name was etched in internet infamy. Her Pearlgate trended, merch was printed, and Layla. She smiled for the first time in weeks when she saw a butterfly mural someone spray-painted over Karen's old HOA sign. Rachel kissed her forehead. "You're changing the world, kiddo," Layla whispered. "I just want people to stop being mean." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Karen tried to countersue again, but by then, the DOJ had formally indicted her under the Civil Rights Act for targeted discrimination, falsification of community bylaws, and child endangerment. They froze her assets, served a no-contact order. When the agents came to arrest her, she was watering her rose bushes. She told them she was innocent. They told her she'd be facing up to 25 years. She dropped the hose. That night, I held Layla in our backyard, the same place she used to cry every time we passed Karen's house. "Is she going away forever?" she asked. "No, baby," I said softly, but long enough to make sure she never hurts anyone else again. Part 3. Karen's arrest wasn't the end. It was the crack that let the flood through. The Department of Justice didn't stop with her. They followed the paper trail I started, and what they found, a web of rot stretching through 4 counties. What Karen ran in Crestview Springs wasn't an isolated HOA overreach. It was part of a coordinated effort, dozens of communities, all connected by a group called the Neighborhood Integrity Council, or NIC for short. Sounds harmless, right? It wasn't. The NIC had no legal foundation. It wasn't registered as a nonprofit. It had no official leadership, but through encrypted email chains and off-the-books meetings, they'd established an internal network of standards enforcers, mostly self-appointed HOA presidents, using fake legal language and fear tactics to reshape neighborhoods. And the pattern was chilling pressure families with disabled children to move through anonymous complaints and harassment, reject ADA-compliant renovations under vague aesthetic integrity clauses, threaten single parents, interracial couples, and veterans with violations for imagined rules, use neighborhood watch programs to justify surveillance. Karen was one of their golden enforcers, and Layla's broken arm, that was the slip-up that cracked everything wide open. 2 weeks after Karen's indictment, subpoenas started landing. 3 other HOA presidents were brought in. One had used fines to bankrupt a family of 4 after their child built a wheelchair ramp. Another had banned service animals from common areas. One had gone as far as forging eviction letters to intimidate a Gulf War vet with PTSD. I watched every hearing, sat in the back row with a notepad, anonymous to most, just another man in a suit until someone said cross and I stood up. People started whispering then. The man who started this, the father of the girl, the federal agent, Mei Chen, the journalist, released her expose Neighborhoods of Exclusion inside the fake HOA machine. The opening image, Layla in her hospital bed, smiling faintly at the butterfly mobile Rachel had hung from the ceiling. The story shook the nation. Local governments opened their own investigations. State legislators proposed a bill, the Layla Protection Act, a new requirement mandating HOA transparency, ADA compliance, and regular third-party audits of all housing organizations. Rachel testified in support. I did too, and Layla. She drew the butterfly that became the bill's logo. But it wasn't just about law. It was about culture, about changing the air people breathed in places like Crestview. That change began in our own backyard. Quite literally, because after Karen's arrest, our neighbors gathered not out of obligation, but because they were done being afraid. Samira, a teacher who had once been fined for displaying a Ramadan lantern, brought brownies. Mateo, who'd been threatened over his son's autism therapy swing, installed new play equipment at the community park. And one morning, just before sunrise, someone quietly removed the old Crestview Property Standards sign at the entrance of the neighborhood. In its place, a simple wooden placard carved by hand. All families welcome. No exceptions. But the backlash was coming. The remnants of the NIC weren't going down without a fight. Online forums started buzzing. Anonymous accounts accused me of being a federal thug abusing power. Someone leaked an old photo of me in tactical gear from a raid in El Paso, trying to frame me as violent. But I'd fought bigger monsters than keyboard cowards. Instead of hiding, I leaned in. I gave interviews, talked about justice, about parenting a disabled child in a world that still sees accessibility as optional. I told the story not just as an agent, but as a father. I didn't want to be an activist. I said on 60 Minutes, I wanted peace, but when peace is shattered, justice is the only path left. That quote became a meme. It was printed on protest signs in neighborhoods, still under the thumb of fake HOAs. And I knew, deep down, we were turning the tide. Karen remained silent through her trial. No statements, no remorse. Her lawyer tried to blame stress, claiming she was overwhelmed by her role and reacted poorly. But the prosecution brought receipts, emails, video, her own signature on forged compliance forms. The jury took less than 4 hours, guilty on all charges. Sentencing was scheduled for June. She could face up to 22 years. Layla watched the news with me that night. Is it over? She asked softly. Almost, I replied. She nodded, then said something I'll never forget. Daddy, can I walk in the park again? My throat tightened. Yes, baby. Anytime you want. She took my hand. Even past her house, I paused. She doesn't live there anymore. Layla smiled, then turned back to the TV and whispered, Good. The NIC collapsed within months. Without Karen and the other enforcers, the group fell into infighting and legal panic. One by one, the president stepped down. Several neighborhoods voided years of illegal citations. A class action lawsuit formed. Over 100 families signed on. Rachel helped organize community town halls across the region. I gave lectures on HOA legal overreach and how to file ADA complaints. But the most important change, kids like Layla were being seen. One neighborhood built an ADA-accessible butterfly garden. Another launched a quiet hour playground space for neurodivergent children. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. And it was real. One morning, I took Layla to the park. Same path, same flower beds. She walked slower, more cautious. Her sling was off. Her crutch glinted in the sunlight. We passed the spot where it happened. She stopped, looked at the grass, then picked a dandelion. Do you want to make a wish? I asked. She nodded, closed her eyes, and when she blew the seeds away, she whispered, I hope no one ever hurts anyone like that again. So do I, sweetheart. So do I. Part 4. The day Karen was sentenced. It rained, not a storm, just a steady, soaking rain that blurred the courthouse windows and made everything feel heavier. Inside courtroom 3A, the mood was electric. Karen Mallory James sat at the defense table, a pale statue in beige. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, hung limp around her face. Her lawyer sat beside her, flipping pages he knew couldn't save her. I sat in the gallery, Layla beside me, her cast finally gone. She held Rachel's hand. Machen sat 2 rows behind us with her notepad open. On the far side, the gallery was full of Crestview neighbors, some in uniforms, some with therapy dogs, others simply there for justice. The judge read the verdict slowly. 21 months of proceedings, hundreds of pages of testimony, dozens of witnesses. Karen was convicted of felony assault on a minor, civil rights violations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, fraudulent misrepresentation of HOA authority, conspiracy to violate the Fair Housing Act, harassment of vulnerable populations. Her sentence, 18 years federal time, no parole for the first 12, and then the judge looked her in the eye. Mrs. Mallory James, you did not simply overstep your role, you weaponized it. You used perceived authority to target, traumatize, and exclude. This wasn't about order. It was about power. And the people of this country, especially the children, deserve better. Karen didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply stood when the bailiff took her arm and walked away without a word. And just like that, The hammer she swung over our neighborhood was gone. But sentencing wasn't closure. Not really, as true restoration doesn't happen in marble halls. It happens in backyards, driveways, town meetings, sidewalks where children can play again. The week after the trial, Crestview held its first fully public, inclusive community meeting. No private emails, no secret agendas, no clipboards. It was held in the park where it all started. They asked me to speak. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because the pain was still raw. But then Layla said, "You should go. Daddy, tell them what to do so nobody else gets hurt." So I did. I stood under an old oak tree, rain still fresh in the soil, and said, "We don't rebuild with policy. We rebuild with people. You want a real HOA, start by protecting the ones who need it most. Build ramps before you build fences. Make room before you make rules." Someone clapped, then another, then the whole crowd. That speech sparked something. Within 2 months, Crestview had rewritten its entire HOA charter with legal guidance from the state. 3 new measures became mandatory ADA-compliant access in all shared spaces, term limits for all HOA officers, a community oversight committee diverse, voted, and transparent. They called it the Layla Act, modeled after the state bill Rachel and I had helped push forward. The committee included a retired Marine, a local teacher, a single mom, a teen on the spectrum, and me. But I never led. I advised. This wasn't about me. It never was. It was about making sure Layla's story was the last of its kind. Meanwhile, Rachel and I were asked to travel to other neighborhoods, places with similar HOA abuse cases. We visited Glenmont, where a mother had been fined for installing a sensory path, in Oak Hollow, where a veteran's request for a stair lift had been denied 3 times before being shamed online. At every stop, we heard the same words. We thought we were alone, but they weren't, because once we started sharing Layla's story, others shared theirs too. And slowly, the tide turned. State by state, cities began mandating registration for all HOAs with oversight. Audits became standard. ADA violations were no longer civil whispers, they were federal shouts. And the fake HOA empires collapsed like sandcastles in rain. Back in Crestview, we planted a tree. Not just any tree. A tulip poplar Virginia state tree right in the park where Karen once screamed at Layla. On the plaque, it read, "In honor of Layla Cross," because strength grows back stronger. Neighbors donated benches. Kids painted butterfly stones. One elderly couple built a wooden reading box and filled it with books for kids. Layla's idea. She checked it every week, proud. "This is my favorite park now," she told me one day, her fingers brushing the trunk of her tree. Even though it hurt, that's how healing works. I said, "It grows right where the pain was." Then came the letter. From Karen, sent through her lawyer. A formal apology, 3 pages long, full of legal wording, too polished to be honest. But tucked inside was something unexpected. A single handwritten sentence. "I can never undo what I did. But I pray you find peace where I lost mine." I read it twice, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing not to become what broke you. Months passed. The media moved on, but the work didn't stop. We launched a nonprofit access advocating community care, equity, safety, and standards, focused on providing legal aid to families dealing with housing discrimination under fake HOAs. Layla designed the logo, a butterfly with open wings. Rachel ran the hotline. I worked pro bono investigations on weekends, because this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the families we hadn't met yet, and the children still afraid to walk on the grass. One day, as fall settled in, Layla ran ahead of me on the park path. She stopped at her tree, arms outstretched, and looked up. "Daddy," she yelled. "Come look." I hurried over. At the top of the tree, a monarch butterfly rested on a fresh leaf. She turned to me, beaming. "I think it remembers. I think it does too." I said, "Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a soft wing in the sunlight, a child's smile, a promise kept." Part 5. A year after it all began. I stood on the same sidewalk where Layla had fallen. This time, she wasn't crying. She was running. Her cast was long gone, replaced by a wraparound pink elbow guard she insisted on decorating herself. Her purple crutch had butterflies on the side, tiny vinyl decals she placed one by one, a symbol of her own recovery. It was a sunny Saturday. The park buzzed with families. The HOA was hosting Spring Together, a celebration of Crestview's new beginning. But more than the balloons, more than the food trucks and music, what struck me most was what wasn't there. No patrol, no screaming, no Karen, just life and laughter. When Rachel joined us, she brought good news. We got the final approval. She said, for what, the community grant? For the Layla Learning Path? I blinked. Seriously, fully funded. Installation starts next month. I looked at Layla, who was spinning in the grass. She didn't know yet, but when she found out, she'd scream. The Layla Learning Path had been her dream, a winding trail with educational signs, sensory activities, butterfly gardens, and resting spots built for children with mobility challenges, neurodivergent kids, and families of all backgrounds. And now it would be real, a permanent mark of resilience, of reclaiming public space from fear. Later that night, after the festivities ended, Layla and I sat on the back porch. She held a small journal in her lap. Her face was serious. I'm writing a book, she said. Oh, about everything. What happened, what I learned, and how. It didn't stop me. My throat tightened. What are you going to call it? She smiled. I walk anyway. I couldn't speak, just hugged her. She whispered, you fought for me. Now I want to help other kids. And I knew then that the legacy wasn't mine. It was her. In the months that followed, access expanded beyond Virginia. We launched a national hotline, partnered with ADA advocacy groups. The Department of Housing and Urban Development HUD added us to their list of trusted resources. Rachel ran community workshops across the state. I delivered lectures to law enforcement agencies on how to spot abuse of power tactics under HOA authority. Layla was featured in a children's book series about young heroes. And Crestview. It became a model community. People moved here not for the fences, but for the freedom. The park now had braille signs. The pool installed lifts. HOA meetings were live-streamed with captions and open Q&A. The neighborhood that once looked perfect but wasn't had become genuinely just. Because this time, we wrote the rules. Karen's house was sold at auction. The woman who bought it was a nurse, a widow with twin boys, one who used a walker. She planted a row of flowers where Karen's surveillance cameras once hung, and one day, she knocked on our door with a tray of lemon bars. This place, she said, has such a strange history. I smiled. It's not strange. It's just unfinished. She laughed. Well, I hope I can help rewrite it. You already are. Layla started middle school that fall. First day, new backpack, new shoes, same determination. Before the bus pulled up, she looked at me and said, I'm not afraid of people who yell anymore. I'm proud of you. I know. I'm proud of me too. Then she climbed aboard, took a window seat, and waved until the bus disappeared around the corner. I stood there a long time, longer than I meant to, because the fear that once hovered over our family had finally dissolved. In its place, purpose. Years passed. Layla's story became part of legal training. Her tree in the park bloomed each spring. The learning path became a field trip destination. The HOA still rotating leadership every 2 years. Still transparent, still real. And Rachel. She eventually remarried to a kind, steady man who adored Layla. We co-parented with grace, shared holidays. We never fell out of love. We just changed shape. And me, I returned to work, but with new boundaries. No more deep cover. No more disappearing. My fight had changed from breaking crime syndicates to breaking cycles of silence. Because no matter where I went, the lesson remained. Real power protects. False power punishes. And that's what I teach now to officers, to neighbors, to my own reflection when doubt creeps in. Sometimes, I visit the park alone. I sit on the bench where I once drank coffee, thinking Layla was safe. The old fear lingers, like a shadow. But then I see a group of kids, some in chairs, some with walkers, some just loud and wild and free, and I feel it melt. Because this place changed. Because we changed it. And that's the legacy, not the trauma, the transformation. Karen Mallory James died in federal prison after 5 years. The official report said pneumonia. Some people gloated. Others shrugged. I didn't feel much. Not because I forgave, but because she no longer defined the story. She was the crack. But Layla was the light that shined through it. The last thing I'll tell you is this. When people say, "Why didn't someone stop her sooner?" I say, "We did." And when they ask how, I say, "We listened to the smallest voice. We believed the broken, and we stood together until justice had a name. Her name is Layla, and she walks anyway." The end.